Meet Betty wearing my felted stitches sweater. I'm very proud of my knits this week because I've really put a lot of time into them. I ruined everything. I'm not worried. Why are you worried?
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. If you've been here before, if you've been here in the past couple of weeks, then you're going to be so excited to hear the update that I have today. If you caught my little teaser in last week's episode, I am so sorry. I had to put it in there. I'm going to explain all of that as well as talk about a finished object that you've never even seen before and a project that is finished with the knitting, just needs to be blocked, have buttons put on it, and then another one that's so close to being wrapped up. So it's a really good time to sit down and chat with you about these things. And I think that without further ado, we should go ahead and dive on in. I won't make you wait any longer. Let's definitely start out by talking about my Stitches sweater by Veronica Lindberg, which is a pattern that's designed to have a circular yoke, and across the yoke it says stitches in repeating text. However, I have been really experimenting and embracing the play with this one by knitting mine up mega oversized and then actually felting it. So yes, since we spoke, I did felt my sweater and it's sitting next to me and I'm so excited to show it to you. And I just want to give you a little glimpse at where I was at the last time I checked in. I was done editing the video and was about to post it. All the while, I was putting my sweater in and out of the washing machine and things were going incredibly well, as I stated. However, the last time I went to go check on it, I saw the pillowcase in the washing machine, which I had put the sweater inside the pillowcase. I didn't wind up pinning a shirt on the inside. I couldn't find any safety pins. And I just thought, you know what? I don't think I need to do this. I think that was me being overcautious. And I definitely did not need to do that. I was glad that someone had advised that in between washing the sweater, I separate the layers because that definitely did wind up being a concern, but wasn't the end of the world. I had it inside of my own pillowcase because it's the only one that I have that actually has a zipper on it. And I don't know if that was for better or worse. It was a silk pillowcase. I sleep on a silk pillowcase. And it's destroyed now because you're definitely not supposed to wash your silk pillowcase in hot water. But I had thrown it in for a few minutes and I would go check on it. And like, it wasn't making so much progress in those few minutes that I felt the need to consistently check it every 5 minutes. So I was in a good routine of throwing it in the washing machine for 20 minutes, going away and getting some editing done, and then checking on it after 20 minutes. And I was doing this multiple times over the course of the day while editing the video. Video is done being edited. I go check on it for the last time, and I see the pillowcase in the washing machine, but then I also saw the sweater. And I actually stood there like my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. Because every other time there was just this huge lump of a pillowcase in the washing machine. And the only other things they had in there were my running sneakers, which by the way are incredibly clean now. They look brand new, even though they're like 10 plus years old. So every time I'd gone to check on it before, I would see the sneakers. I saw the giant lumpy pillowcase with the sweater inside, and then the little towel that I'd thrown in there as well. And this last time I went to check on it, it was just pillowcase, sweater, and the sneakers and everything else. But I literally, I could not figure out what I was looking at. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, did I not zip up the pillowcase? I thought I must have just been so hasty in trying to get this done that I never zipped it. But I looked at it a little further and the zipper on my pillowcase broke. And at that point, I was home alone and I was just talking out loud. I was like coaching myself through this. Like, it's going to be okay. Just get it out of the washing machine. Let's just go evaluate. I'm sure everything's fine. And it was the first time when I checked on it that things didn't look the same that they had every other time. Somewhere in here, I will be putting in or will have put in some footage of the updates as the first few times I had gone for this 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20-minute cycles, and it really was coming out so beautifully. Like I said, I don't know that the silk was a help or a hurt, but it really was making for a gorgeous felted fabric while it lasted inside of there. Okay, this has been in the washing machine for about 10 minutes now. On hot water, I wound up not being able to find stainless steel safety pins, so I figured let me just low and slow it, and I threw it in the washing machine. I'm just gonna check on it every so often. What's interesting is that the sleeves have like mega felted in some areas. You can even see just how tiny some of these little circles are versus the ones over here versus the ones up there. So the sleeves are really starting to do their job in felting. There is quite a bit of fluff kind of just kicking around, but otherwise the body really hasn't done much yet. It's mostly been in the sleeves. Now, when I took this out just now, I did really pry the sleeves apart. I'm guessing because those are so felted already in certain areas. They were already just starting to stick to each other on the inside, and I'll even have to pull them apart just a little bit more, but I was able to pull them apart. So I'm not as concerned about the layers sticking to each other as long as I just keep doing this, I think a few minutes at a time. So I'm going to make sure everything's pulled apart. I'm going to try and put it back in the pillowcase in a different orientation. I think I had the sleeves on the outside, and this time I'll try to put them more on the inside and see if that helps, and we'll chuck it back in for another 10. All right, so it's been in the wash for another 10 minutes now. As you can see, you're looking at the inside of the sweater because I made an executive decision to actually just go ahead and turn it inside out so that the floats on the inside of these sleeves in particular wouldn't be as like crazy sticking to each other. But you can also see that this one on the right is still way more felted than the one on the left. So I'm really trying to figure out exactly what it is about the way that I'm putting it in the pillowcase that is causing that. But let me turn her right side out so we can see what the outside's looking like. All right. As you can see, we do have some good felting. I don't think it looks too much different from how it looked on this one sleeve, but it is interesting because this whole side of the sweater just seems to be felting way more than the middle or this side. So there's something about the way that I keep putting it in the pillowcase, I think, that I'm just gonna have to figure out. My theory here is that it can only felt to a certain point, right? And I did make it incredibly oversized, so I don't think I should be afraid of it felting too small. My thought is just to make it felt as much as possible so that it will felt as evenly as possible. And my biggest concern right now is just the fact that the body doesn't seem to want to felt quite as much as the sleeves do, which people did tell me that for some reason the undyed yarns tend to not want to felt as much as dyed yarns, but this is pretty drastic and I'm just not really sure how it's going to go. So I'm going to keep doing this, alternating for about 10 minutes. I have to tell you, this is not for someone with a bad back. Holy cow, is my back aching just from pulling this out of the washing machine. So I'm trying to get as much moisture out of it as possible while it's still in there. But checking it periodically just means that you have to pull it out while it's still wet. So I think this might even be drawn out over the course of a few more days. And I'm not going to keep checking in after each one because I'm just going to continue this process. And I'll just try to keep shifting exactly how I'm putting it in the pillowcase, as well as I think I'll continue to do this inside out until I'm seeing more felting across the floats. But this is getting me very excited because this really seems to be working quite well all in here. Okay, I know I said I wasn't going to do another update after I took it out next, and you could probably hear the washing machine in the background, But I just took this out of the washing machine and oh my gosh. Look at that. It's felting. It's actually working. I can't seem to figure out why it's working in certain spots and not others, but I was starting to get really nervous that it was just this gray yarn. But this one section is like totally felted. For reference, this is what it looks like in most other places. And then this is what it looks like here. Is that not insane? 100% the way to go is doing this inside out. And I think I'm officially gonna go put it back in the washing machine and leave it for maybe like 20 minutes. Holy cow, I can't believe this. And then this time, the layers did stick together and it was lumpy in weird places and then not in others. And for the first time, it really felt like things felted unevenly. And I really thought that I ruined the sweater. I looked at it and thought, this is it. I ruined everything. But I literally talked through it. I pulled the layers apart as quickly as I could while they were still wet, because what I found was that as soon as things started to dry, it definitely got more difficult to do that. So I pulled the layers apart and I decided to just call it a day there. I dried the sweater to the best of my ability and I just went and laid it on my blocking mats and figured we'll reassess the situation tomorrow. It was a couple days later when I was able to revisit it, and I have to tell you that over the course of those couple days, it was still not fully dry. And that was even with me having laid it out in the sun for a little bit. It did not dry completely in that time. So I went and I tried it on, I took another look at it, and I thought, okay, let me just go try and hand felt this, which is the update that you would have seen on Instagram. If you followed me over there, I tend to put these little updates in my Instagram stories if I think to do it. So I went back to the method that I had used to felt my swatch, which I also have with me here. This was the original swatch that I had felted, and I did this entirely by rubbing it with bubble wrap and then like dunking it in hot and cold water. And even still, this is, now that I know what felted fabric looks like, this swatch still has pretty defined stitches. So I was out there trying to basically hand felt the spots that wound up being missed along the way once the whole thing had escaped the pillowcase. And I was getting nowhere with that. So ultimately, I just theorized with no real evidence to back up this idea. I just kind of thought at some point the fibers simply won't be able to felt anymore, right? Hopefully. So hopefully, if I just throw it back in the washing machine, while I won't specifically be targeting the areas that haven't felted down as much, at some point, the ones that have felted more than others, at some point, those are going to have to just stop, right? Like they'll no longer shrink. And then the other ones will just have to catch up. And I don't know. So I threw it in the washing machine a few more times. In total, I think we had it in the washing machine for, I think we calculated something like an hour and a half. And that was over mostly 20-minute stints, which is what I figured out in my washing machine worked best. I will show her to you where she's at, and then I will continue the story because I realize I'm just depriving you of the grand reveal here. So let me get her. Meet Betty wearing my felted stitches sweater. Yay! It's not perfect. I understand that, but it's pretty darn good. I'm going to see if I could get this to sit on Helena's stand so I can continue to tell you more while she's on here. All right, I think that should do for right now. So here we have my felted stitches sweater. It's been drying for 4 days total, and I think I can officially say that it is completely dry now. In that time, it has spent quite a bit of it out in the sun because this fabric is just so dense and so thick. even when I thought we had hand dried it pretty well with towels, it was still dripping, sopping wet. So knowing that, I would give it its best shot by allowing it to dry on my dress form. So this is Betty. It's just one of those plastic dress forms that has the horrible fabric on top of it. So I figured that would be good enough. It wouldn't ruin too bad by letting it dry on there. And I'm so glad that I did. I also stuffed the sleeves with some cardboard. I was just trying to avoid a lot of creasing in this because once it's there, boy, is it hard to get out. So the good news is it is entirely felted. I am done felting this sweater. Like I said, I know it's not perfect. You can probably tell that this side did contract more in the felting process than this side did. And I tried everything to even that out and nothing was working. And I accepted that it's a marginal enough difference. Please be okay with this with me because I worked really hard to perfect things. And I think if I have any tips for felting, it's to accept the fact that it's never going to be perfect. So I'm satisfied with where things are at right now, despite the fact that they're not exactly where I'd want them to be. Now, this is interesting to me because this was my felted swatch that I was literally basing all of my measurements off of. And I think you could tell pretty clearly that this did not shrink down nearly as much as the actual sweater did. And that's me comparing it to the side that wound up being larger. The side that's smaller, it is a huge, huge difference, which also means that the size I had knit this sweater to, while it was massive when I tried it on the last time, that was intended to shrink to the dimensions that this swatch shrunk to. And instead, it surpassed that, which means that the sweater is actually a little bit smaller than I intended it to be, but I did leave plenty of wiggle room. So I think it's fitting perfectly. Although at the moment I'm filming, I haven't been able to get the collar over my head. I'm going to have to steek that, which is the plan because this is going to become a quarter zip. I'm going to steek it. If I do that or not, before this video is posted, you will know because you'll either see this on me or you won't. But that's where we're at right now. I also was chatting with a friend, thinking of all the ways that I could pick up the stitches to knit the ribbed finishes on this one. And I know I've talked about so many options, and I had mentioned one, and you guys brought it up again last week, and that's because I failed to let you know why I was not going with that option anymore. The original idea, or at some point the idea, was to knit up the wool sweater and then actually add a row with a cotton or something that wouldn't felt, then felt the sweater and then use those stitches as the picked up stitches, or at the very least they would hold space to pick up stitches within. And the only reason I decided not to do that was because it was going to be an extra step that I didn't know was going to work in the first place. Like, would it just be now felted around that cotton or whatever that yarn would be? Would it be felted so much that I would be like cutting yarn, trying with tweezers? You know, I pictured kind of a nightmare if that failed. But also, even if it worked, I didn't know if it was going to matter because my thought was that I had knit everything too long so that in a worst case scenario, I could cut back the felted fabric and then add the ribbed finishes. But the good news is it's not too long. I actually do think that the dimensions are very close to how I expected them to be. Of course, I don't know for sure because I can't try it on just yet. Once I've steeked it, I will try it on. I just don't want to do that in a hasty way. I want to make sure that I get my line really well lined up. And actually now you can probably see, for everyone who's concerned about me cutting into the letters, that's not happening at all. You can actually see just about how deep the quarter zip should go. So that's exciting too. Okay, chatting, I feel very scattered. I apologize. I just want to get all of this. I'm so excited that it actually worked. Like, let's just take 1 second to, yes, it did work. Like, I'm very excited that It's exactly what I was picturing. Now, I was chatting with a friend about picking up the stitches and how I should do that. And ultimately, what I'm going to try and what I've ordered supplies to try is going to be tedious, but I think it should work and give me the most stable option. So this is kind of branching off of what I was talking about last week, which is to add a blanket stitch around the edges of the sweater and then pick up stitches from there. I've ordered a couple different upholstery threads, basically. So like thicker linen thread and then also just a polyester thread. I wanted something that was going to be pretty strong and stable so that I could use a needle to create a blanket stitch on the edges anywhere I plan to add the ribbed fabric. And I'm going to, first I need my yarn for the ribbed fabric so I can figure out my gauge in that ribbing. And I want to make my blanket stitches that wide. I want to make sure that each stitch in the blanket stitch is as wide as one stitch in the ribbing so that when I go to pick up the stitches, I can pick up one stitch in every blanket stitch around. That's going to be incredibly tedious since I am planning to knit the ribbing with fingering weight yarn. So specifically around the hem, I have a huge job ahead of me. But I'm going to experiment. I'll see if it works. If not, I'll go from there. So I'm going to pick up the stitches using that upholstery thread, something really strong. And I'm going to do so by staggering the depth of the blanket stitch, because once I've picked up all of the stitches around, I do plan to make some decreases on both the hem as well as on the cuffs, and especially on the cuffs, so that I can just cinch things in ever so slightly. And I'm going to have more of a balloon effect on the sleeves. But my thought is that if I stagger the depth, it's going to allow more space for that fabric to gather and cinch in. So I'll have picked up the stitches. I will decrease to whatever number seems reasonable once I've figured out the math on that. I'm going to knit, I'm guessing somewhere around 3 inches deep, but then I'm going to double that because it's all going to be folded. So I'll be knitting around 6 inches of ribbing. And at that point, I think instead of folding over my knitted fabric to the back side and stitching down on the back, instead I'm considering folding my knitted fabric forward and trying to stitch it in such a way so that it conceals anything that might be lingering from the blanket stitch. And I think that's one of those things that I'm just gonna have to figure out kind of when I get there. But that is the thought. I'm also gonna be doing that on the collar. So I'll be steeking down the center front to about where the pink zigzag is. And I will be picking up stitches around the collar, knitting my ribbed folded collar, however tall I want that to be. And then somehow I think I'll be picking up stitches then down the whole front of now the standing collar, down the steeked edge, same with the blanket stitch. I'll figure that out. And I think that I'll be working maybe some sort of double knitted collar there. And that's what I'll be putting the snaps on. I think I'll have to back that with maybe a gross grain ribbon or just something to give it a little more stability. I also have some interfacing I could maybe weasel into there. We'll see. And that's the plan. The only other thing that I still have to do with this garment is I want to give it a final steam while it's on the bottom. Maybe I can't do that because it's plastic. I want to give it a final steam somehow. I might use some towels and just stuff the insides. I kind of keep its shape, but to try my best to work out some of these little lumps and bumps. And then I also have to finish, I did start this, but I want to go over again with some deep pilling, using a razor to get some of the fuzzies off. And those are mostly from the time when the sweater crept out of the pillowcase. And then the second day of felting, I just threw it into a drawstring bag that I had to try and felt it in there since my zippered pillowcase was then broken, and that kind of left some little fuzzies on top. So there's a combination of little towel fuzzies and little bag fuzzies that I'm just trying to get off as many of them as I can. So I'm gonna just finish doing that at some point as well. So that's what's going on here. I think the only other thing I wanted to touch on is I thought for a while that this was a felting flaw, but I personally believe this to actually just be a pattern issue. And that is the lump that you could probably see pretty clearly from where the pink zigzag is across the stitches portion and then down to the sleeves. There's kind of this hump that happens here, and you could just tell that there's extra fabric right in this area. And I personally am thinking that that's due to a pretty rapid increase that occurs right before the text. And I think it just happens so that you can make sure you have enough stitches to fill out all of the text across the sweater. But it is kind of unfortunate because there was just simply nothing I could do. And looking at some Ravelry photos, it looks like something that happens with just the knitted sweater. I mean, my knitted sweater, before I felted it, had this, I mean, you could just tell that it was a really big jump. But that is kind of unfortunate because I do believe that to be an issue with the pattern, though I could never say for certain since mine has just been so unconventional. The felted fabric is incredibly dense, and I'm just hoping that that's something that once I've worn it a few times, I'm hoping it'll kind of break in. But even if not, this is intended to be an outerwear piece, so I'm convinced it'll keep me very, very warm. But I do want to show you it's pretty comical once I take this off of the dress form, how it's sitting right now. It literally is stiff as a board. The sleeves in particular are super, super dense and stiff. And I think that that's because of all of the color work that I had done there. And so the floats and everything, they're like double the thickness as, say, the body of the sweater. But I am confident that after kind of working this around a little bit, it should fit better. But right now it's reminding me of when I was a kid. I used to play with these little things. They were like little paper dolls. And I feel like it looks like a paper doll sweater right now, the way that it is just absolutely holding its shape. I think that this is so funny, but I do love it. And it did come out exactly as I planned. I will see. Let me see if I can turn it inside out for you. See, like this is so hard to do right now, but I feel like it's important to kind of work it back and forth a few times just to kind of break in this fabric a little bit, though I am confident that it's gonna work out. Don't worry, guys. I'm not worried. Why are you worried? And I'll say too that during the felting process, I was turning it inside out, right side out. I was going back and forth between the two just to kind of, I don't know. Again, I was making things up as I went. There's not a ton of resources out there on how to felt a sweater. Most people are just felting small accessories. So I really felt like I was pioneering this category. But I also never wove in any of my ends. I didn't think that was necessary since it was just going to felt up. And I feel good about that decision too. So this is the inside of the sweater. These are all of the floats that I had. And this is the front. And then you could see in the back where I just didn't weave in any of my ends. They've all just kind of felted down. Nothing's going anywhere. I feel pretty good about that. So I'll leave this to wrestle back to the right side out. I will steam it, and then hopefully by the next time we chat, I will have done the blanket stitches in at least one part. That reminds me too. So the yarn for the cuffs, I think that I had mentioned that I was trying to shop other people's stash for that. I don't know if I did mention that after all, but ultimately all of the yarn in this sweater was either thrifted or gifted by family and friends. And I really kind of wanted to keep that train going. So I didn't exactly want to go out and purchase brand new yarn. I wound up looking for different fingering weight merinos that I knew of on Ravelry to see if I could find any in a color that looked as close to this body color as possible. And I was able to find one from Knit Picks in someone's yarn stash. So I'll be getting that in the next couple days here, and I'm hoping that it matches. And then that should be enough for the cuffs, collar, hem, all of that stuff. I did get 3 balls. I don't know. I can't even predict how much I'm going to need. I can wrap my head around the fact that there's going to be a lot of ribbing, especially on the hem. But it was hard to know exactly how much I would need. So I figured I would get the 3 balls and I would kind of see how things are going. And worst case, I might do an accent color somewhere, or I'll just try and find, I don't know. I'll figure it out as I go. That's how we're playing this. So yeah, I should be getting that yarn in soon, and I have to do the blanket stitching. So hopefully something of the blanket stitching is done the next time I see you is what I'm trying to say. And that's the update on my Stitches sweater. Yay! I'm so excited you guys are excited. I'm very pleased. This is exactly how I hoped it would turn out. So hooray. I know that sweater is going to keep me warm because I'm literally sweating from just having been holding it for the last little bit. And that's very good. It's an outerwear sweater. Okay, let's move on now to the finished object that you've never seen before. I did mention it as a plan in last week's video and decided to cast it on this week. This is the Lemon Pouch by Yin Jeong. Here it is. I have mixed feelings about this project as it is. So I have a friend who's getting married. Her new last name is going to be Lemon, and we actually have a bridal shower for her this weekend. So I was like, let me just try and bust this out this week. And I was able to. It took me hours. It was a good full day of knitting, but definitely I think doable over a weekend. And basically you start by knitting up the leaf and the stem of the pouch, and then you move on to knitting the I-cord, that is the drawstring of the pouch. And from there you start to work the body of the lemon, and this is all integrated from the get-go. You work your way down with creative increasing and decreasing, and you wind up with like the little lemony little tip at the end, and it does have a slit on the side. Now, having knit this up once, there are some changes I would make, and I also added a note on Ravelry for something that I didn't find this to be the most clearly written pattern. That's my issue with it. Mostly I just struggled a little bit in the beginning on how the leaf was being made, and that's what I added notes in my Ravelry project page about. But then the other thing that I haven't really quite been able to figure out is exactly how I was supposed to have tied the leaf and the stem and the cord. It's not looking quite right on mine, and I'm pretty sure that the idea is that you're supposed to just be able to kind of slide the drawstring kind of through the lemon stem and then open it, but that's not particularly clear to the person who's doing it. And so I can't tell if I tied mine wrong because I found the instructions to be tricky. Someone else mentioned the same thing. I don't know. That needs a little revision, but it is done. It is super cute. It's going to work for what I need it to. The only other thing that I wasn't crazy about with the pattern is how deep the slit is on the side of the lemon. I feel like with how deep it is, I don't know why I would ever even open up the top drawstring, because I could just reach inside. I just threw a ball of yarn in there for now, but I could just reach in and pull out whatever I want from there, which makes me feel like this is kind of useless. So I might wind up just seaming up the side of this one, and then in the future, I would probably just start working in the round after the ribbing is worked at the top, because once you do open up the drawstring, which is just difficult, there's a ton of room. Even if this was completely closed up, you could still really get whatever you need to out of there. Or even if this was at least half the size, the slit on the side. So that's something that I would take into consideration if you plan to knit this up. But overall, really cute little project. Definitely a stash buster. So I thought I was going to use leftover yarn for my Salty Days sweater, but looking at the color, I was unsure. And then also this is intended to be knit up, I think, on fingering weight yarn, and I'm using more of a heavy DK or light worsted weight yarn. So I wasn't confident in the yarn quantities and didn't want to run into an issue there. So I decided to dip into some of the same yarn in a different color that I have. This one was gifted by my Aunt Lori to me. And then you might recognize the yarn that I used for the leaf here as the same yarn that I've been using for my garden party top. So I'll tell you about that project next, but I did wind up having some yarn left over, and it was really the only green that I had that would complement the cotton yarn. So this is a cotton viscose blend. This is 100% cotton. They're both K&C brand, and they were both little stash busters. So I will give you a quick project breakdown on this one, but just know if you have a ball of yarn kicking around for the lemon, you have more than enough to make one of these. And then the stem, I think, is doable with literally just scraps. I should have measured beforehand. I'm sorry that I didn't, but it's very much a stash buster. You don't need to go out and purchase yarn for this. I would definitely just say use what you got. And those are the only things. If you have trouble making the leaf, I would check out my Ravelry notes, because I tell you on there exactly how I did it and made it a lot easier for me. And then I would start knitting in the round way sooner than they tell you to in the pattern. And I do still hope to make one for myself for the wedding, and mine will be bigger. So I'll be implementing those changes there, and I'll let you know if I think of anything else then. So let me do a quick rundown of the finished object stats for this little lemon. So the pattern's called Lemon Pouch by Yin Jeong, and it costs about $3.89 on Ravelry. The yarns I used were K&C Essential Cotton and K&C Movement, so that is respectively the yellow and the green. The yellow one being called Goldenrod and the green one being called Grassy Green. These were both yarns in stash, and the yellow one was a gift from my Aunt Lori. I am planning to use the remainder of that for a tank top, which is why I knew that I could break up this sweater's quantity for an accessory and a tank top, if you were curious. Full price for each of these skeins. I am kind of guesstimating on the movement because I did purchase that one years and years and years ago. So I'm just calling it the same as the Essential Cotton, which was around $5.49 per ball. However, because the yellow is gifted and the green is literally a scrap left over from another project, I paid nothing for the yarn here. So if you were going out and purchasing these yarns to knit this at full price, you'd pay about $10.98 total for the yarns. So that's just a ball of each at that $5.49. But my yarn total is $0 with no additional expenses. That makes the full price project total for this one, so the yarn plus the pattern, about $9.38. However, my project total is $3.89, or just the cost of the pattern. And it was on my needles for a single day, so my cost per day is also $3.89. So super happy with that. I would definitely say that if you like to knit up these sort of little accessories, it's worth the knit. I just wouldn't say that this is the most beginner friendly because there's kind of a lot left for you to figure out, but still a really cute little knit, and I'll be making another one. Let's chat now about my project that is basically done. I've just been waiting to film before blocking clips so that I could block it and then ultimately also put on the buttons. So I will have the full rundown for this one next week, but I can show you at least where it's at right now. So this is the Garden Party Top by Rhonda Yerxa. It's a bottom-up cropped lacy eyelet vest tank top summery knit. That sounded like some sort of Alibaba description for what this is, but I have completed all of the knitting on this project. And I'm just gonna pinch close where the buttons are going to go, but you could see that it's not blocked yet. So it's looking particularly cropped, but it is a quite cropped garment. And that is even with me following the instructions for the longer torso. Definitely, if you're choosing to knit this pattern and you want it to be more standard length, I would actually probably just follow the instructions for a full additional buttonhole repeat, and just go ahead and knit it with 4 buttons. But I was okay with mine being a little bit more on the cropped side. It's already a mesh garment, so I'm not exactly planning to wear this for work. It's more just for hot days when we go take OC for a walk or something. What I love about this pattern is the fact that once you've gotten through the ribbing at the hem, everything is integrated. So you do start by working the fronts and the back of the split hem vest all in this twisted rib. And once you finish all of that ribbing, you connect everything so you're working the whole body flat. And what I mean by it all being integrated is that once you're done knitting, there's no additional picking up stitches. You've actually worked the whole button placket as you go. There's also some twisted rib worked under the arms and around the armholes. So once you reach the bottom of the underarm, that's when you split again to work the two fronts separately from the back. And you continue all of that twisted rib up the button plackets. And then the back is worked with the mesh eyelet detail. And it's only after you've 3-needle bind off seamed the front and backs to each other that you come back through and work the last bit of the button band that you see in the front. I will say that it's probably worth it to just pop a stitch marker on this project to indicate which side is the right side and which side is the wrong side, because I definitely got mine confused and I wound up doing the 3-needle bind off on the wrong side. And once I realized my error, I went to go pull it out and just fix it. But I was actually looking at it and I kind of liked the extra little design detail. They came out particularly neat and tidy. So you might notice that mine has a raised little seam on the shoulders, and that was a choice. I actually decided to keep it there because I just thought it added a little something rather than it just flowing from front to back. I don't know. I actually kind of liked it. I would definitely say that this is one of the more complicated patterns that I've knit from. If you've been here, you know that I just do struggle with lace already, but the instructions and everything that was going on, it was just a little bit tricky at times. I had to read some things multiple times to make sure that I got it all right. But in the end, it looks literally perfect. I think the only issue I actually have with this project right now is the yarn. So this is that K&C Movement cotton viscose blend. And while I love the look of it, it has this really gorgeous kind of mermaidy sheen to it. It is one of those fabrics that just sticks to every little dry hair, every little chip on a nail. It pulls the fabric. So already it kind of looks a little bit rough because there have been quite a few instances where it's just gotten caught on something silly and it's wound up pulling the fibers. I think I just have to get over it and accept that that's what's going to happen with this top, and that's going to have to be okay. So after today, I'm going to block this one. I'm going to do a full wet block, and I really will give it a good stretch in that time because the eyelets are made up within a garter stitch, and then with a twisted rib and everything, I feel like this has a lot of room to grow. And my thought with this has always been that I would rather be a little bit roomier than too snug. So I'm going to try and get all of that room in the blocking process. And then I have some shell buttons set aside that I'll be using to finish off this piece, and I'll be wearing it in the next podcast episode for you to see. But as far as just the knitting goes, this has only been on the needles for 20 days today. And I did actually finish this now a couple days ago. So a pretty quick knit overall. I mean, obviously it's like all just mesh and cropped and there's no sleeves or anything. And I did work mine on a 4.5mm needle rather than the 4mm needle suggested, just to get a little bit more space in my eyelets. So that's the Garden Party Top by Rhonda Yerxa. Last but not least, I have here my sister's Manon Cardigan by Morika Knit, which I'm knitting out of Fonty Soyu. It's a merino and silk blend yarn that I've been knitting up on 4mm needles. I think the opposite of the last project. This was supposed to be on 4.5mm needles. I've been on 4, and then vice versa with the Garden Party Top. So if I got that mixed up, it'll definitely be on the screen. You might remember that I started this one by knitting it in the 3rd size and then was able to try this on my sister once I reached the point of the split for the sleeves and body, and we determined that it should just be a little bit bigger. So I wound up following the increasing that was already happening, because this is kind of worked as I think this might be called contiguous. I just don't know for sure, but it was sort of a blend of a drop shoulder raglan situation. So I just worked some more raglan increases basically until I hit the closest to the number of stitches for the 4th size. So basically the top half is knit as a medium and then the bottom half is knit sort of like a large. The whole project is worked in this moss stitch, and then I've finished out the hem as instructed in the pattern with just a standard rib and then an Italian sewn bind off. And then where I'm at right now is I put so much work into this. I'm very proud of my knits this week because I've really put a lot of time into them. I just found more time to knit over the past week than usual, and I'm really happy about that because I've been wanting to get some of these projects just off the needles and get them moving, and it feels really good to finally be in a place where I've done that. So this definitely got a lot of attention, where I not only finished the body with that ribbed edge, but as of this morning, I also finished the double knit button bands. And if you've ever done double knit button bands, you know that that is an absolute labor of love, but it is officially done. And I even just went one step further and got the stitches picked up for the collar on this cardigan. It's a short sleeve cardigan. So we're actually way closer to being done with this than it may seem. I have so thoroughly enjoyed this pattern. It's really beautifully written. And I just keep saying it, and I'm going to keep saying it. I love working with this yarn. I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but in person, this fabric just has a finish to it that is so luxe. It's so beautiful. I would absolutely knit with this yarn again. All of the stitches in the moss stitch just look so textured and defined and beautiful. So I wasn't sure how the fabric would look then in a stockinette or what is the double knitting here, and I think it looks incredible. This is one of the most even, just crisp looking things I feel like I've ever made, and it should, because the inspiration for this piece is definitely a luxe item. It kind of has that Chanel vibe. So I feel like to have such polished finishes here really sells the look. I was impressed with the buttonholes on the button placket here, where you don't break the yarn and you just work the buttonholes as you go. There are 3 in total right now, and then there will be a 4th incorporated into the collar. But that process was just so simple. I've never done the petite knit version of those don't cut the yarn buttonholes. I have to imagine it would be a similar process, but wow, what a game changer. Just to not have to cut the yarn and weave in all of these ends when you're making the buttonholes is amazing. The only thing I will say right now is that they're feeling like very teeny tiny little buttonholes. So while I was looking at something around a 3/4 inch button for this sweater, I feel like I'm going to have to size down a little bit. I sent some options over to my sister, and I know that we're thinking something kind of glitzy. I think she wants pearls. So I have to find something that's the right size. I'll probably just test with a few buttons I have on hand to make sure what's going to be just the largest button I can fit through these holes. And then that'll be what I wind up looking for. But all that's left to do is finish up knitting the collar on this one, which is a really stunning little collar that has these eyelet details to it. So I'm so intrigued to see how that is done. And then after that, I just have to put my stitches from the sleeves off the try-it-on tubing and back onto my needles and knit those in the round with that same ribbed hem like the hem of the garment has. So I'll probably have just about 2 inches or so of knitting to do on those sleeves so that they kind of hit in the crook of the elbow. And then with those 2 things, this one is done as well. I think it's another one that's going to transform massively in blocking. The moss stitch creates a really kind of scrunched up fabric that has a ton of room to stretch, and especially with the composition of this one being that silk and merino, I feel good about it blocking out a little bit bigger than it is right now. And I also think that the double knit button band is in a place where it's just the littlest bit too loose for the size of the garment currently. So I feel like once I've stretched things out a little bit, that should also look a little bit tidier, a little bit neater, but I'm just so thrilled with this garment, and it makes me so excited to cast on my Paul cardigan by Manon Cardigan, just because I really enjoyed her writing style and the attention to detail. She also does include video support. The videos just don't have anyone talking. So that's the one thing, is if you're unfamiliar with a step, that could be a little bit confusing. But just to be able to visualize someone doing something new, it's been really helpful. So this one's been on my needles for 30 days today, and I can't imagine it's gonna go past another week of this, and that's great because I want to get it to my sister as soon as humanly possible. And that is everything I've been knitting on this week. I knew that we were going to wind up in this position where everything finishes kind of at the same time. So I'm definitely getting a little bit more serious about what I want to cast on next, and just trying to be strategic about it, but also feeling like everything I've been working on has been pretty detail oriented. And so I'm honestly just in the mood to knit like a raglan sweater, but it's so not seasonally appropriate. I'm trying to avoid that. But I definitely do feel like I need a little break from these intense whips I've had. So I'll be evaluating my options and probably picking the most brainless one of them. But whatever it is, it's just going to feel so good to get these projects off the needles. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone for participating in that discussion last week. I simply haven't had enough time to get into the comments and get back to those of you who were commenting about the chat that we had, but I just really am so happy to have a space where we could have a conversation like that. So thank you so much to everyone who stuck around and watched the end of that video, and especially to those of you who commented to keep the discussion going. I'll be getting back to you guys in the next week as well. And with that, if you enjoyed this video, I would definitely appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, then you're going to be notified anytime I post a new video. However, you can usually expect a new upload on Saturdays at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And with that, a big ol' thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.